All right. How are we feeling?
Hot. And not in a sexy way.
Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah.
Sweating isn't sexy.
Not in this context.
Yeah, there's really only one particular type of sweating that's sexy, and it's...
What's that, Kirby?
There's a couple of songs about it.
You can look them up.
You can look it up. Hello and welcome to Literary Canon Ball, a podcast for anyone who wants a fun and feisty conversation about books. Literary Canon Ball is inspired by the work of the Stella Count and the Vita Survey that reveal the ongoing imbalance in the conversations around books written by female identifying writers. Literary Canon Ball is striving to correct some of that imbalance by talking about books written by women from around the world. I'm Kirby Fenwick and I'm joined by Neve.
I'm Neve Marnie, student by day, writer edited by night, and reader by nature.
Very good. And Fee.
Me. I swallowed a fly last week.
So,
Accidentally.
well, do you know that book? That could be perilous.
Yeah, I need to swallow a spider now.
Oh, goodness. You know, you probably already have.
Oh, well, it's still inside me.
Oh,
But what's that stat about how many spiders we eat in our lifetime?
yeah.
Is that a real stat?
I mean, it's a stat I've seen a lot, but I don't know the actual number.
Well, there was that article that I sent you guys about the kind of the ecosystem of houses is something that hasn't been put under the microscope until recently, and there's a thing called book lice, which we are all paranoid about.
I know I am, considering the giant piles of books that are beside my bed.
Twitching.
Yes. So, to our book for episode 7. Sei Shōnagon completed the Pillow book in the year 1002. Yes, you heard that correctly, 1002. Written during the late 990s and early thousands, which seems so bizarre to say. When Shōnagon was a lady in the court of Empress Consort Teishi. I may be saying that incorrectly, so I apologise if I am. The Pillow book is a genre-bending collection of short narratives, thoughts and opinions, and lists covering such topics as royal and religious ceremonies, nature, and poetry. There's lots of poetry. First translated into English in 1889, The Pillow book is a significant work of literature, both because it has lived for 1,000 years and also because of Sei Shōnagon herself, a fascinating woman with a remarkably vivid voice. Now, I brought this book to the podcast, and I'll explain why. Probably about 18 months to 2 years ago now, I was reading a book called The Lost Origins of the Essay by John DeGarda, which kind of traced, I guess, non-fiction or essay-type writing throughout the history of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And the Pillow book featured in that book. And I read the little section from the book, and I was just kind of taken by the style and the voice, and I thought, wow, like that's something that I really want to read. Not just because of what was there, but also because as I found out a little bit more about the book and realized that it was 1,000 years old and was written by a woman, and I thought, yeah, this is a book that I really want to read. So that's why I brought it to the podcast. And I'm really pumped to have some chats with you guys about it, because I know that we had some interesting experiences. So yeah, I'm really keen to hear what your thoughts are.
And what did you think, Neve?
Every goddamn time.
I'm quick off the mark.
Because I was about to go to you.
Yeah,
You
no.
knew, you could see my body language. Yeah, this book was a really interesting experience. We've sort of discussed beforehand, and I think maybe worth mentioning again. You can't really read this cover to cover. That's not sort of the book this is. That it's not particularly comfortable reading in terms of it was written in 1002, and it in places and how Sei interacts with the world and how she views it, it reads like it's written in 1002. But I think the moments in the book that sort of captured me the most is when it read kind of read really in a modern way. Like,
Yeah.
you know, if you, and I said this to you, if you substituted the word poem for the word like text or Facebook message in this book,
So spot on.
yeah, it would sound like, you have an assignation with your lover, and then will he text you the next day?
Yeah.
Like, someone has texted you, and then you need to get your whole like crew around you
To reply.
Yeah.
That really changes one point for me, because there was one section in the book, it was kind of goes into like dating life in the court and stuff like that, and the idea of marriage is so fluid that it took me a while to get my head around, like, oh, when you're married doesn't mean you're with that person forever, but the courtship sort of stuff comes up quite frequently, and there was this weird sort of unspoken rule of sending a guy a poem and him saying, oh, if I receive a poem from this person, I'm not going to talk to them ever again. And Sei was like, well, I'm going to send you a poem. And she did. I loved it. It's so on point. She sounds like her voice was so vivid and rich and so full of personality.
Yeah.
Sometimes I struggle to know if she was being satirical or not. One example, and it's a book of lists amongst other things, and this list is things later regretted, and on the list, an adopted child who turns out to have an ugly face.
Yeah, it's hard to know.
I can't tell.
Yeah, she's such a tough character in
Yeah.
that kind of respect, because there was so much about her that I really loved. Like, her descriptions of the fashions were
gorgeous.
so brilliant. And I actually got online and like looked up, 10th century Japanese fashions, because I wanted to try and get my head around her descriptions. And
I have to say, thank you for putting the effort in. What you're wearing today, like, people at home can't see it, but it looks amazing, Kirby.
Yeah, thank you. This is cherry blossom red, and yes. But yeah, there was so much of. She's such a complex character in many ways, because I'm reading her and I'm really appreciating her wit and her sarcasm, which is definitely there, and I'm appreciating her appreciation for poetry. And then at the same time, I'm thinking, wow, that was a really bitchy thing for you to say, or that was a really mean thing to say.
She's definitely on the side of the ladies' man. She really puts down other women constantly.
Yes.
And she's just like, oh, go with him. He's a ladies' man. Yes, respect.
But I wonder if some of that is like, I wonder if the traditional court was a really competitive place for women, and if that comes back to that. I don't know. Like, it's 1,000 years old, like. But did that not blow your mind? Like, you're reading a book and it was written 1,000 years ago. Did that like not blow your mind a little bit when you're reading it?
It kind of blows my mind in terms of the fact that I was reading it. It's 1,000 years old, but also at the same time, there's like, I have one leg in has historical context, and so we need to review it in that way, and another leg in this kind of reads like I'm reading like a very long text from my sort of bitchiest friend who's given me all the goss. Like, it sort of moves between those two extremes, and it's interesting.
I think you're right on the money there.
The times that I remembered it was 1,000 years old were generally around comments of class.
Yes.
Which were quite shocking when they came out, of how much she looked down upon people of lower classes with less money. I didn't read any kind of satire in those. It felt very kind of point blank.
And I think it probably would have been.
Yeah.
Like, it really would have been, wouldn't it?
But it really kind of, I found quite jarring, because there are other sections where I'm like, that's still relevant today. Mm-hmm. And there is one bit where it's on the list of rare things. One of the things is quite practical, and she's often quite practical. A pair of silver tweezers that can actually pull out hairs properly.
Oh my god! Yes! I remember reading that and being like, true girl, true.
That's what struck me about it, was I'm reading this book and I'm like, okay, it's 1,000 years old, and
we still haven't mastered it.
But there's also so much of it that is so easily transferable to a modern context. And I know that the translator, we all have the same edition. This is obviously been translated a couple of times, but we all have the same edition, which was translated by Meredith Mckinney, who's actually an Australian woman. And I did read some, and there's a little bit in the introduction to this particular translation, but I did read something from her online as well, saying that she wanted it to be that more conversational translation because she wanted it to be readable. She wanted people to be able to not be frightened off by the traditional language. So I think a lot of that was like quite a conscious choice on the behalf of the translator, which kind of, you know, we've done a couple of translated books now, and it's always really interesting to consider how much impact the translator has had on the book.
Oh, definitely. You can tell how much effort and love and care has gone into this book just by looking through the notes. Like, if you were just reading this straight up, I think so much of it would go over your head because we just don't have the same sort of cultural references. I mean, in, you know, that era, it was all about Japanese and Chinese poetry, and that was really how they sort of communicated to one another. But we're not familiar with that canon. So going to the notes and then sort of being able to appreciate Sei's wit on that level was really good.
Or just contextualize what is being said. Yeah. And I think that's a really smart way I didn't read it that way. And so I think I almost need to go back and read this again, much slower without the podcast recording deadline, to have the chance to flick through those notes and really have more context for what's happening and why it matters. And
particularly because there are a couple of lists where they're just like place names of, say, mountains or rivers or buildings, and when you read it as a list, it's just a series of random places, but in the back of the book it's like, okay, this is why she's so clever, because this rhymes with this and that means that, and it's like so many layers of thought have gone into those lists that if you read it otherwise, it's just like a street directory. It's not like,
you need the context of the notes, but it is a hard slog. It's
definitely
by no means an easy book to read.
I found it a hard slog because it was almost like, you know, when you have a writing prompt or something and your mind just goes off on a tangent and you're like, I felt like this book was just so many prompts to have my own thoughts. I'm like, yeah, that's your list of trees. Well, I've got my own list of trees. And I would like think about my own trees or my own birds or my own buildings. So I found myself being pulled out of the book continuously, because it's like such a joy just to kind of sit around and think about rare things, or things that are kind of, there's so many nice turns of phrases for like the titles of the list, like things that make the heart gallop, and it's just like, oh yes, horses do make your heart gallop, they really do.
There's a lot of beautiful language. I don't think you could say that Sei wasn't a wonderful writer, because I think she very clearly was.
I mean, we can recognize her talent through the mediation of like time plus language translation. So the fact that her talent has come through from that must, I mean, if we were sort of more fluent with the Japanese, or maybe that time in history, we'd probably even have a greater appreciation.
Yeah, absolutely. I really want to talk about a little bit about the structure.
Do you now?
Take a shot. Take a shot.
I'm fascinated by the way that this has been put together, because, you know, like nearly 300 short sections of, you know, some are quite longer narratives, which are a few hundred words long. Some are like 2 lines, you know, a random thought, a list of trees or mountains, as you said, Fee.
Yeah.
It's so remarkably different, and it really takes the genre of, you know, a straight non-fiction book or a collection of essays or whatever, and just breaks it completely, really.
I found it so interesting because, as we were saying, there's no through line of narrative or character arc or quite obvious growth as like a person. And it is occasionally like a series of tweets.
Yes.
And one that I found just the comedic value of it was just so on point was a list called Things That Create the Appearance of Deep Emotion, Plucking Your Eyebrows. And also the sound of your voice when you're constantly blowing your running nose as you talk. Like, yeah, that really does sound like you're being really deep and emotive, but really you're just congested.
And it was that sort of like those really things that could be tweets, like you said, that just made me sort of think, so much has changed obviously in our world in the last 1,000 years, but how much have humans really changed?
Oh, definitely. Because I think this is just like historical gold, generally. Like, historians don't generally want people who are writing fiction or whatever. They want people like Sei, who are really in depth and who will talk about, like, oh, this person was wearing this and that meant that, and like they'll go really in depth. And also, I think having those little observations, we sort of view people in history as sort of less human or like less evolved or than we are, and that's just not true. And you can see that. I mean, we're relating to a woman who lived 1,000 years before us.
Which is quite fantastic that it's a woman who recorded it and
Yes.
has been continuously published and promoted as an excellent work of literature.
And it's a classic in Japan, like having read a little bit about the history of it, most people who've been educated in Japan can recite the first few lines of this book. Like, it's a big part of their education.
Now I'm just like, what are those first few lines? I want to do that and then impress people in Japan.
But yeah, I mean, the fact that it was a woman that wrote this and that it has carried on.
Such a document. One thing that really struck to me as part of the idea that it still carries on is the resonance of, there's those funny things, as I mentioned, that are so human, but then she's quite philosophical in some sections. And again, this just caused me to go off on my own thoughts. And like, often I would only be able to read this book and focus for about 3 minutes at a time. So it's impressive that I managed to get up to page 80. Didn't finish it, but props to me for trying. And again, this is from the list of rare things. You never find an instance of two people living together who continue to be overawed by each other's excellence and always treat each other with scrupulous care and respect. So such a relationship is obviously a rarity. Like, that's kind of like, you kind of get a hint of her life without too much detail, and it's enough for you to step into that space, which I found the idea of Sei didn't think anyone was ever going to read this, but often it's written in such a way that it's very inviting for someone else to read.
Yeah.
So I kind of wonder what was going through her head when she was jotting all these musings down.
Well,
I'd pay so much money to know.
I know. Well, there are several different versions of this work. And I think the translator talked about how the earliest version probably wasn't written for like audiences, but then other bits came into it that were probably requested. And I think at some point in the book, she talks about, I can't remember, but she sort of directly mentions an audience. And then at the end, there's sort of like, oh yeah, I never really intended it for an audience, but then that sort of happened.
Yeah, I get the feeling that perhaps in the beginning when she first started writing, when she was given that gift of paper and she first started writing, she probably didn't think about an audience. But I think the intimacy that is clearly present in the court would mean that you couldn't, have an undertaking like that and people not be aware of it. So I feel like as that process went on, there would have been requests and, people wanting her to document things or record funny stories or whatever. And in that respect, then there is an audience and she is writing for an audience.
Oh, definitely. There are some beautiful wit and, like, you can see how, like, she sort of in many ways really overmatches the men in her life in terms of intelligence and how she references poetry.
For sure.
And it's actually kind of sad. It's almost a little bit sad because about how women weren't. It was unseemly to be able to be knowledgeable in Chinese poetry. There were several moments where she would have to try and figure out ways to get around that because they would send her Chinese poetry and she's like, well, fuck, I have to respond to this now. But she'd have to be even smarter. She'd have to basically outwit them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, and isn't that kind of that idea of women reducing themselves or shrinking their intelligence because, they don't want to offend the men in their life by being smarter than them? That's just like, infuriating.
Time does not change. I found that interesting, that idea of her, how she openly says, I didn't intend this for anyone else's eyes, but then of course people found out. That explanation is kind of tucked away as the final piece.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's important info. Put that up the front. That said, as soon as I read that, because I skipped to the end and I read that and I was like, oh, she's kind of giving me permission not to finish it just yet. So I kind of put the book down after that for a few days because I was like, yeah, she didn't want me to read it to begin with. But that said, I'm kind of joking around. I really enjoyed stepping in and stepping out of this book. It was kind of like a cool pond, get some relief, but you can't stay in the water for too long because you'll turn into a prune.
I think
so that's step out.
Yeah, I think that's the way to read it. Like, I actually did finish it, and it was a slog. And I honestly think the way to read it is to do that: is to dip in, read a few sections, read the notes, and then walk away and come back. Like, not try and read it in one go.
Yeah, because
not that I read it in one go, but read it in a space of like 3 weeks. It's a lot, and it's a lot to take in. So I think the best way to read it is really slowly.
I almost kind of think it would be a lovely book to kind of work your way through the year with, and with each list, read her list and then write your own list, and like be all meditative and relaxed and just think about trees and rare things. And I don't know, I reckon that's an idea of maybe 2018 I'll start meditating on stuff like that.
So basically, you're saying that the Pillow book is like a writer's handbook. It's kind of like a writing prompt book. You could buy it for that purpose. It's a book for your soul.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
I'm going to be a better person in 2019. I can see it now.
Well, I mean, that was what Meredith Mckinney, that was what she sort of said. Like, that was probably how it was intended. Those lists were sort of like a guide for poets and writers. So, I mean, you're not exactly using it in a way that it wasn't meant to be used.
Oh, good. This is encouraging.
Yeah.
So come back to me in 12 months' time.
Okay, we'll do a follow-up episode next year. So what's the final thoughts on the Pillow book?
Good thoughts. I think the most engaging bits for me were the narrative bits that were interspersed. Especially, I think the narratives that really shone for me were things where she's talking about courtship, or when she's talking about Her Highness, which her name I always forget. And it is
Consort Teishi.
Consort Teishi. Yeah. Sei has a really deep emotional attachment to Teishi.
They have a really lovely relationship, I think.
Yeah. I mean, even when there's Teishi's being like a little bit sly and a little bit like, ooh, that was kind of harsh. I mean, there's just a really deep bond there. And I was like, oh, I want more of this.
Yeah. Where's our novel about their friendship and their relationship? That would be a cracker, wouldn't it?
Yeah, someone write it, please.
We get the DeLorean out. Off we go.
What about you, Fee? What are your final thoughts?
I found it quite an escapist read into my own thoughts, not hers. That said, I kind of agree with you, Neve, how the way you described her, she's like that great, funny, sarcastic, witty friend who's the life of the party and always has a story to tell, but you really can't spend long periods of time with. Like, I tried reading this straight through on a plane, and I was like, okay, I might give you a rest for a while, and I'm just going to be a wallflower over here and think about trees myself. So she's got a strong voice. Like, what a woman. Such a clever woman. But I didn't want to be with her for long periods of time because she is a bit of a bitch, and I'm like, oh, don't be mean, please don't be mean.
You kind of want to be like the friend who has like the coffee dates with her, like
gets the goss, and then
and like the like A+ conversation, and then sort of be like, okay, bye, bye, Shay.
Please don't gossip about me behind my back. I kind of feel like she's like, keep her at an arm's length.
I'm really glad I read it, because it's obviously been sitting in my mind for a while now. So I'm really glad that I read it, and I think it's going to be one of those books that I will come back to and dip in and out of and read the notes and, you know, read about the translation and that sort of thing. So hard work, but Sei's great, and I'm glad I read it.
Thanks for bringing it to the club.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, so recommendations. What have we been reading, watching, and listening to that we want to give the 2 thumbs up, or 1.5 thumbs, or 1 thumb, whatever? Who would like to go first?
Oh, I suppose I'll go first.
Oh, I thought you were going to handball it to me. I was like, okay. All right, off you go. I don't know.
You were giving me like those eyes of like, you need to do this first.
Hungry eyes.
And also,
right, off you go.
I feel like we've gotten into a rhythm now.
Of me just being a bitch.
Is that all you say?
Yeah, 2019, I'll be better.
Okay, so first recommendation is called Begin and Begin. It is a young adult anthology. It's
nice.
Yes, it's entirely Australian authors. It's sort of under the umbrella of the #LoveAusYA sort of movement. The editor is Danielle Binks, and she also contributes a... God damn you, motorcycles! She also contributes a story to the collection as well. I've really enjoyed this collection. Like, it was really good. Like, every story I just was like, had some like great idea or this like beautiful sort of writing style or something that just drew me in. I was like, because usually with a collection there's a few stories that are kind of disappointing. And I mean, I read this a little while ago, but thinking back, I can't think of anything of a story that I was really disappointed with, which is so rare for an anthology.
That's a great recommendation for an anthology. If you read an anthology and are not disappointed in anything, I'm not sure you can get a better recommendation.
Yeah, so high praise.
And are the stories quite different in terms of genre and perspective?
Yeah, they're all sort of different. Like, there's a few sort of contemporary. There's more sci-fi and fantasy than I expected in an anthology.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Like, the first story you get right off the bat. I won't spoil it because obviously it's too small sort of to do even the like really small spoilers. But basically, it's about a girl living on Mars and sort of like the colony there.
So it's set in about 10 years' time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm just so pessimistic about our Earth.
And it was just really nice. Like, there's a few, like, it's a nice diversity of like story, genre, also of characters. Like, the first story has a like a lesbian love story in it. It was really cute. I was like, this is a great, like, why can't every anthology have this like at the beginning?
A lesbian love story.
Yeah, just as like a rule. Like, that is the law now. I've made that. So authors include Will Kostakis, Alice Pong, Amy Kaufman, also a slew of other ones. And yeah, it was just really great. just pick it up, especially if you're not particularly like YA like savvy.
And that's what's so great about an anthology
Yeah.
is you can pick it up and get like a real sort of taste for the styles of books that you can find in you know, YA books or books that are marketed to that audience. Yeah, quite quickly.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like it's like a little taster of different, and these are all like really like well established YA authors as well. So, thumbs up. So second recommendation is a film, Thor Ragnarok.
Ooh.
Oh.
So basically, I went to see this the other day. I'd read some really good reviews of it, and I just really enjoyed it. It was a banger. It was a banger of a film. Like, the director, Taka Waititi? I always fucked.
I'm pretty sure Taka is how you pronounce his first name, but I'm not 100% on his surname.
Okay.
Anyway, he's that
babe.
really good looking. Really good.
I think it's
feeling.
Taka
And
Waititi.
his personality.
Oh my god.
Goodness.
Yeah, he's just gorgeous. Also, like Hunt for the Wilder People.
Oh my god.
is so
Oh my god.
good. And there's another film which I watched of his, which is really great.
Is that the vampire one?
Oh no, that one's also
They're
really
making
good.
a sequel of that.
Oh really?
But there's another one set in New Zealand that's very good. Okay, we're going into his filmography, and that's not exactly what this recommendation is. But like, do watch all his films because he's like amazing. He really brings like a unique flavor to the film, and part of it's also the script as well. Like, there's just for a superhero movie, it felt like the composition of superheroes movies is mostly like 80% drama and 20% of like interspersed comedy to make sure that it's like actually watchable, or maybe like 70-30.
Extended action sequences that you fall asleep in kind of make up about 80% of the film for me.
Okay, well, it's drama / like action, whereas this felt like mostly comedy, and then with some drama and action sort of interspersed between that, and like the type of comedy is a sort of unique comedy I haven't really seen in superhero movies before. Like, it was just really like dry, and like there was some great like sarcastic moments, but also like you feel like you're laughing with the film, and it's not trying to be like overly satirical, which I think like Deadpool was a really great movie, but also that was a very specific type of audience, whereas I feel like Thor was really accessible in that way, and it was just a good time. Like, if you want to go into a cinema, and because it's cold and cool, I would recommend watching this one. It's how I'm gonna like finish that. Also, great music, and I can't remember her name. I should have Googled it, but in one of the first podcast, I recommended Dear White People, and the actress from that is in this, and she's amazing. So,
2 thumbs up.
thumbs up.
Intertextuality there. I love
Yes.
it. We're referencing ourselves because we're 7 episodes in.
Yeah, we can do that now because actors have done other things. There's enough time has lapsed. And last recommendation is called The Magpie Lord. That's sort of the series name. The actual book is called Charm of Magpies. It's by KJ Charles. This one's a Victorian gay romance that's like very heavy on sort of fantasy. It has like this really like great textured world about it. Like, the writing isn't always like super great, but I had a lot of fun reading it. So
It sounds pretty pheasant.
Pheasant? Oh god! Oh god! Okay. I just had a lot of fun. It's a trilogy, but you could possibly read it as a standalone as well. And yeah, I just had a good time with that one.
What a great name. What a great title.
Yeah.
As soon as you said it, both of us were like, that sounds amazing. I definitely had those eyes. I was like, woo.
All right, Fee, what do you got?
Not much.
What?
I know. I've been busy. I've left the house for short periods of time, so don't get too excited. A really fun podcast, Australian, from the ABC called Dear Science. Have you guys heard of it at all?
No, I haven't.
It is such a romp. It's so much fun. So basically there is a scientist and a science reporter. So there's an expert and then there's just like a really fun kind of jokey sort of journalist. I've forgotten both of their names. I felt like they were my friends when I like just absolutely bolted through the 9 episodes of season 1. They're like 15 minutes long. And the concept of it is like an agony aunt.
Yep.
I was thinking Agatha Christie when I started saying that word.
That's what you were going to say.
An agony. Jesus. Okay. Start that again. It's basically writing in letters of for advice to an advice column. But basically where they source all the letters are from like New Idea or from an astrology website or from like the newspaper. So very like unscience-y kind of advice column sections from very vast periods of time. So they have a Dolly Doctor letter from the 80s and they basically try and use science to give them a solution to their life problems. And it is so amazing and funny and fantastic because, for example, one letter was a person writing in where they're asking about advice of how to deal with sexual problems with their partner because their partner is really obsessed with raincoats and they are not. And that's what turns them on is raincoats. And they talked about fetishes and they kind of came up with a scientific answer to how to deal with that problem. And I won't spoil that for you because it's fantastic and great. And they have a fashion advice letter, which they also use science to give an answer for. And I've learned so much within 15 minutes about fields of science I had no idea about. So it's a lot of fun and you're going to be that annoying person full of facts afterwards.
That sounds so great.
Yeah.
It's the best idea ever. It's such a good idea.
Very clever.
Like, makes me want to write a letter asking for life advice just to get like a scientific answer. I mean, I need a lot of life advice, so that's not hard.
Listeners can't see Vee's body language, but we can. Her eyes are very wide and she's actually leaning in to like tell us this information. She's very passionate.
Very.
Like, this is the recommendation I feel like you need to follow up on.
Yeah, because usually I'm not enthusiastic about anything. I never use my hands to talk.
Never.
Never. Now, the next one. Jesus, how am I going to top that one? Because I'm more excited about this recommendation. And it's The Green Road by Anne Enright. And oh my goodness, what a book. Like, just stop listening right now, shut off the podcast and go buy this book because words cannot describe how much joy I got from reading this book. So much joy. And also heartache because it's an Irish book, so there's a lot of fucking sorrow in it and you just want to stab your eyes out.
Sorrow and potatoes.
Oh my goodness, and then everyone dies. But no, that's not a plot spoiler. Like, that's just the Irish way of being. And so it's basically it's set on King Lear, the play, but it's a modern kind of retelling of that story. But instead of King Lear going mad in his own kind of kingdom, it's the mother of the house, and it's set into kind of novellas. So each chapter is quite a contained sort of lengthy novella that could stand alone, and it's from different perspectives of the family, and there are 4 children in the family and the mother, and each sibling is given a chance to kind of like, you find out about their story, and using that kind of structure gives you a chance to find out where there are so many miscommunications in families, which is like an inevitable thing where one sibling will think something about the other one for like 20 years and then discover actually that's not the case at all. And it kind of builds up, you get drip fed all this information about different characters, And then it kind of builds up to a family Christmas at the end. And it is such a treat. It is so good that my family actually banned me from carrying the book around when I went to visit them, because I was just like stop and read aloud passages. Lengthy passages in my shockingly bad Irish accent. So
I can't see a problem here. What was their problem? That sounds fabulous to me.
my performance isn't Oscar worthy, so they were a bit annoying, particularly when there is like this chicken bit, which I think I even read aloud to you at one stage about the girl crying with the chicken.
Yes, you did.
Yeah. That wasn't the first time I read that, and I didn't improve. But Anne Enright is such a charming writer, and she is sharp and clever, and she makes you look at the world and your family and yourself in like a really kind of magnifying and arresting sort of way. And a lot of themes in this book, like every character is so deeply complex, but not in the kind of like, oh, I need to add a bit of color here and a bit of this here and a bit of that there, but yeah, it felt like a flower unfolding in the sun. She does not write like that. That was really cheesy. She is like as sharp as a tack.
I have added her name to my list after I saw you reading that the other day, so I'm super excited to get to that book.
And share her nonfiction as well is,
oh wow,
yeah,
okay,
like just
prepared to fall in love with Anne Enright.
What a woman! I want to be her so badly. And then another book that I read was Goodbye Vitamin by Rachel Kwong. I think I pronounced her name right. Maybe I didn't. This book is quite sad. Structurally, it's over the course of 1 year, and it's almost like diary entries that are dated day by day, but the writing in them isn't like diary form. It's kind of like vignettes of different aspects of the year unfolding. And it's so quirky, but it wasn't like... I learned really random facts about animals in the world, so that was really pleasing to me because I like that in general. But it was like through her father has Alzheimer's, and they're trying to balance between caring for him and keeping him comfortable and happy in his reality of the world. And to do that is quite tricky because his version of the world is swiftly becoming untenable and unrealistic because he's slowly losing his perception. It's quite heartbreaking and touching, but at the same time quite realistic because there was a lot of tension there and frustration because it's quite hard looking after someone with dementia or Alzheimer's. And it's also quite a funny book. Not as funny as the blurbs said on the front. They're like non-stop laughter. And I'm like, why are you laughing? There's some really sad bits in here. Like, calm down. But they're kind of trying to do different ways of looking after the father. So they all change their diet drastically based on the science. And they basically end up eating frozen peas all the time. Like, it makes no sense. Like... So, quite a lovely book, which I think would be a nice companion on a plane. And my last recommendation is The Dollop, which is an American history podcast. There's probably 3,000 episodes now.
Wow.
Or more like 300, but they're long episodes. They go for over an hour, and there's basically one guy. There are two comedians. One guy does all the research, and he kind of tells the story of a moment in American history to the other guy, and the other guy doesn't know what the story is, and it's just them kind of interacting with one another with jokes, and then they suddenly do improv, and they do the characters, and they reenact certain scenes, and it's so crude and loose and fantastic. If you listen to My Dad Wrote a Porno, this is exactly what you need as you patiently, or not so patiently, wait for the next season of porn to come, because this is pretty fucking funny and I highly recommend. And just be careful listening to it in public, because I've been that person around town just losing it. Absolutely losing it, because it is just the most ridiculous ridiculous. Like, history is... reality is stranger than fiction.
Endlessly entertaining.
And what do you have, Kirby?
I've actually got a couple this month. So the first thing is a TV show from Netflix called The Good Place, which is really great. I've binge watched like 2 seasons, you know, because that's super healthy. The premise basically is Eleanor, who's the main character, she wakes up in the good place, and is told by Michael, who's played by Ted Danson very well, I must say, that she's in heaven. This is heaven. It's called the good place, because she has been such a wonderful person on Earth. But Eleanor hasn't been such a wonderful person on Earth, and so she quickly figures out that in fact she does not belong in the good place, and her soulmate is an ethics professor, and she tells him and convinces him to make her a better person. She can stay in the good place. But there's a pretty serious twist, which I will not spoil, that completely throws everything like all up to shit, really. But it's really great. The production is really great. The characters are really great. It's just a really lovely show. It's lots of fun. So I highly recommend that on Netflix, The Good Place. And Kirsten Bell was in one of my all-time favourite shows, Veronica Mars. So
yes.
We'll pretty much watch anything she's in, to be honest. The other thing I want to recommend is something that probably a lot of listeners have actually already read, but it was my first time reading it, which was Elias Grace from Margaret Atwood. I read it because I knew there was a TV show coming, and I didn't want to watch the TV show before I read the book. I have a thing about that. So I wanted to read the book, and what struck me about it was that historical fiction, which is kind of what Elias Grace is in a way, is not really a genre that I would normally pick up, and yet I could not put this book down. I raced through it, and it's a decent size. The copy I've got is just a paperback, and it's a couple of inches thick.
Oh, that's a door stopper.
Yeah, but I couldn't put it down. I was so fascinated by this character, by all the characters, and by this story, and I just had to know what happened, and I had to know what would happen, and yeah, really great. I've only managed to watch 1 episode of the TV show, and I wasn't too enthused by it, so I think I'll just stick with the book. But yeah, super great. Margaret Atwood obviously is a superstar. And the last thing I want to recommend is something that I feel somewhat conflicted about. It's an essay from the Paris Review called What Do We Do with the Art of Monstrous Men, written by Claire Dedura. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. I'm probably not. So the premise is, obviously there's been a lot going on recently in Hollywood, with a lot of really horrible men being exposed for who and what they are. And the premise of this essay is really, how do we consume their art? Can we separate the work of Woody Allen from the person Woody Allen? Can we separate the work of Roman Polanski from the person Roman Polanski? Should we, like, how do we deal with those situations? It's really well written, and it's a really sort of great wondering about that. She doesn't have any solid answers, and that's okay, but she's trying to explore it, and she's trying to think through it, and she's trying to get there. The last part of the essay is the part that I feel really conflicted about, because she makes kind of a connection between these abusive men and the idea of the monstrous woman. And the monstrous woman is so often the woman who puts her work or her art before her children or her family. And I'm just not sure that there's a connection there to be made. I think that's makes me really uncomfortable, that idea that a woman that maybe is not the this perfect ideal of the doting mother, that in fact pursues her work and her creative work, is somehow monstrous. I'm not sure there's a comparison there between literal abusers. So that was a little bit difficult, but I still think it's a good essay, and it's worth reading despite that ending.
Yeah, and then there's also like sort of the comparison of like mental, like sort of abutting abusers with like people who were mentally ill and self-harmed. And I feel like there's definitely discussions about mental illness and how we idealize mental illness, like artists who have mental illness. But I don't feel like that's the same discussion. I mean, some people in those, like in that list, like Pablo Picasso, like he was kind of a dick in his actual life, but he wasn't like that. Self-harm and like mental illness doesn't feel like it's in the same,
it's not on the same
category.
level as assault or sustained harassment or other things. So it's a tricky one. It's still worth reading, but just be aware that is a part of it as you're going into it. But yeah, still worth reading, I think.
Yeah.
Cool. That's all I've got.
Yeah. Oh my God, The Good Place though.
So good.
I've known about The Good Place for like a while now, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll get onto it. And then I finally actually get onto it, and I'm like, why did I wait so long? This is so fucking good.
So good.
Or so forking good, I should say.
Well, yes. You can't swear in the... Fee's looking at us like, what? You can't swear in The Good Place?
I don't want to go then.
If you... Whenever... Eleanor swears a lot, but it comes out as fork. So she's constantly saying fork. Yeah. Because you can't swear in The Good Place.
I would provide a whole cutlery drawer of swears.
It is... it's hilarious.
Oh, yeah. I think I watched it in like 2 days.
I reckon I smashed through it in a couple of days too.
Yeah.
I had a long drive to go on that I wasn't going to be driving, obviously. So I downloaded like 10 episodes and just watched one after the other.
So you have an excuse for being in confined space. I was just very unhealthy and just watched them one after the other. Let's be real. But it's so good though. Like the writing's so sharp.
Yeah, really, really great. Okay, well, thank you for listening to Literary Canon Ball. That's all we've got time for episode 7. We hope you'll tune in again next month when we'll be talking about Jeanette Winterson's Christmas Days, which I just discovered a couple of days ago has recipes in it. So I'm really excited to do some Christmas cooking while I'm reading Jeanette Winterson's stories.
And I will not be. But in the meantime, if you want to continue the conversation or you just want to be digital friends, you can follow us on Twitter at Lit Canon Ball or on Instagram at Literary Canon Ball or find us on Facebook.
And if you have something to tell us that's a little bit more than 140 characters, or have they increased it to 240 now?
It's 280. 280.
Oh, goodness. That's
so spacious. Maybe people don't need to send us emails now. They've got 280 characters.
Oh, but I love emails.
Yeah, so do I. Yeah, well, I mean, it's a luxurious amount of Twitter characters.
Well, if you want to write us a letter of advice and we can provide the answers in the form of science, it might be pseudoscience, but it'll be science nonetheless. Send us an email because we actually do love them. And the email address is literarycannonball@gmail.com. And actually make sure you check out our website. It is pretty fucking good. Forking good. And that's where you'll find a full wrap-up of the show notes and a list of and links to all our recommendations. And that website address is literarycannonball.com. Yeah, hop on it.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
I think we should take a photo of Fee.
Yeah, I know, right?
Being a creeper in the corner with a
camera. With a camera.
Yeah, I mean, I've broken out and I've still taken photos, but I have seen no sacrifice from you.
Oh,
my sweat is too sexy. I'm sorry.
I'm too sexy for my sweat.
It'll break the Instagram. Sweat patches galore.